you were telling me about some situations that you'd been in that you were trying to add nuance to a conversation where someone used sort of the banner of, you just said, abstinence kills. And in your mind, I think you heard that as, well, wait a minute. How can something that you don't do kill you? How can not doing something be killing you? And you, especially as a psychologist and somebody who sees people clinically, know a lot of people who've chosen that path in terms of overcoming and beating their addictions. So I think you were trying to add the nuance that let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Remember that a lot of people are on this journey and have this path themselves, and let's be inclusive of them. Unfortunately, you were pinned and pigeonholed into this group of people who wants to impose abstinence on other people. I think that was the misunderstanding. So that's what I was trying to get you to unpack and say, that you were trying to add the nuance to the conversation, and it's not that you think that abstinence should be imposed on people. Actually, I think knowing you, and you, of course you'll speak for yourself, but knowing you want people to be able to make whatever their own decisions are that they want to make, insofar as they have a vast array of information, the best possible information they can possibly have. And so you would agree that if you were somebody who is trying to impose abstinence on somebody else, that could kill. Or I don't know. Would you agree with that statement?
I would not. I would agree to the extent that imposing anything on anybody else can be damaging to the person who feels like they're being imposed upon. The idea that it could be taken to the extreme of being murderous somehow is a little bit beyond my comfort level of that level of simplification.
Too indirect, too many complex factors there.
I think so. I mean, it's just too strong a position. Bringing it back to one of my favorite slogans: make sure that what you do, say, and believe is the product of your own conclusion. I believe we are all autonomous individuals. We have thinking, feeling. We are thinking, feeling people, and we can take in information from around us, sensory information from other people, and we don't need to take what we get as gospel. We don't need to sort of take the information from the outside world as being, well, that must be what it is, and therefore I must comply or I must grasp that concept. I think we all have to sort of understand the information we get from other people, from information from all sources, and then we have to do something with it based on who we are as individuals and be like, that makes sense to me, but it makes sense to me because of who I am and how I understand the world, and therefore it's the product of my own conclusion, even though it may be borrowed from these various sources, but it's come to be my own understanding. And the idea that something can be imposed upon somebody, and then that imposition be turned into somehow it's reframed as a weapon against somebody, it's a bit strong to me.
So to what extent, I want to see to what extent you would even be willing to meet in the middle here, or not in the middle, just to meet, to figure out where the agreement stops and the disagreement starts. So I can imagine, well, no, I can't not just I can imagine, I am of the mindset that if a person who has an addiction and who just wants to know what to do, it's a confusing landscape to navigate, of course. And if they're told by somebody who has some sort of authority in the field that there's one and only one way to do this, you need to stop doing drugs, and that person does not offer the reasonable array of options to live a better lifestyle, but yet you feel like you don't have power, you don't have autonomy, and you're told that what you need to do is stop doing drugs, that you have these defects of character. I imagine that person living a lifestyle to such an extent that they're following these principles, and if they're not following the principles, they feel like they're completely failing on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they maybe don't have other options open to them because there's a system of people mandating abstinence. I know it's happened to some people. To what, I mean, where will you meet, for instance, if somebody has a family member who has gone through some sort of traditional abstinence mandate, kind of a program, and they wound up dead or damaged or hurt. I could imagine believing that it's by virtue of the program, and I think that at least in part, that person who believes that would have some sort of a point. Maybe it's not that the program damaged the person, but maybe it's something more like that person didn't get their full range of options that they should be owed. What do you think about that?
Well, all of that's pretty strong language. I mean, the idea that there's a mandate. So if somebody goes to a traditional like rehab, and the messaging, the treatment program is based on abstinence, based on teaching principles that are geared towards helping people achieve sobriety, to be drug and alcohol free. And that person leaves and relapses and either gets in more serious trouble legally, financially, physically, or God forbid, passes away, overdoses, and dies. The idea that the cause of that person's death is the treatment program that tried to help them achieve sobriety is I guess where the extent that I would go to meet in the middle on that particular topic would be that that there may be a partial responsibility on the part of the treatment program for maybe there may be counselors there, or people there that the person interacts with, or whatever, that I don't know, maybe partially respond. I just can't, I don't know, like holding the person accountable for that person's death. Would you hold, how do you hold like heroin responsible for someone's overdose? Do you hold a substance responsible for somebody's death? Do you hold the person responsible for using drugs? Do you hold the person who tries to help the person not use drugs responsible? What if you have a place that it doesn't happen very often at all, but there are safe spaces for people to use drugs, and oftentimes the death rates in these safe spaces are not very high at all. Very few people actually die on site at safe consumption sites or overdose prevention sites because they've got Narcan, because they're using safely. That's why they're called safe spaces. But if someone were to leave there and overdose and die, do you blame the safe space for having try to help the person use responsibly? It's just too much blame in one area for me to sort of embrace fully.
But I think if it's possible, I think I can meet you both closer to your points right now. I can play devil's advocate for both of you while also meeting you closer to your points. You're saying that who are you blaming? For if a person, God forbid, goes through some destructive consequence through drug use or any other kind of addiction, who exactly is to blame? It's perhaps okay to say if there is one single system that is offered in terms of help for a person, and that is sort of eclipses any other kinds of help that could be provided, and that is held dominant, that could be destructive. And it's arguable that that's not a good kind of help. But what you want is for this language to get a little bit, to not be so loose or not be so strong, where somebody says, well, abstinence kills. You want the nuance. You want systems of care that don't value autonomy are harmful. I mean, is that a reasonable middle ground there?
Yes. Yeah. So for example, I mean, I can jump on board with the idea that, let's say somebody gets court mandated to treatment. They're not voluntary. They're not voluntary at all. They didn't decide one day, I have a drug problem, I need to get help. But I'm mandated to go to this particular program, and that program browbeats the person into, cleaning toilets with a toothbrush and demeaning them and making them sit in a chair in the middle of the room and, throwing shame at their way and breaking them down to try to build them up. There are these therapeutic community models. They're very strict behaviorist kind of militant type places that still exist, even some faith-based rehabs, not your Minnesota model 12-step rehabs, but some really strong faith-based rehabs that, you know, shove Jesus down your throat and stuff, like really hardcore. Scientology has these Nar-Anon, not to be confused with Narcotics Anonymous, but Nar-Anon treatment programs on the West Coast. They're horrible. They're horrible, and they preach and teach all kinds of weird stuff, and that's very destructive if someone's been mandated and that's the only system of care that I think those places should be held responsible. So I can go that direction. If that's the only choice for somebody, if they have a choice and that's where they get funneled, that's difficult for me to accept, for sure.
I think I could bring this horseshoe even closer together. So one side of this conversation, insofar as there are two sides, I don't know, but some people who might be involved in this conversation would say that abstinence kills. Okay, you're saying no. Let's talk about what that even means. As soon as you argue with that, the argument falls apart as soon as you argue with it. It's maybe reasonable to say that providing a medication for people, which is, I would say, maybe the opposite of abstinence, could equally kill if that were the case, but not because through that logic, but not because the medication is doing something to kill somebody, and not because the person abstaining that kills them, but because indoctrination is harmful. So if there's you don't have to be somebody doing harm intentionally. You could be somebody operating within a system of indoctrination one way or another, whether that means MAT, medication for addiction, Uber alles, or if it means abstinence is the only route and you're made to believe that, and that's what you're teaching, and that's what the people who you're now teaching start to believe about their lives, that they are not the agents of change, but either this abstinence or spiritual program or this medication program is the thing that's changing you or keeping them alive. I could see that being harmful. Respond. You should go ahead and respond to that before I start getting too long-winded.
Well, yeah, no, it's true. I mean, the other piece of it is, not to it could get pretty ugly here, I guess, but which you want, you're kind of.
No, I don't want that. I actually don't want that. I want it to get more agreeable than disagreeable.
Okay.
I'm trying not to stick out a position. I have one, and we can go there. I'm trying not to see what we can make of this.
Well, I think your position is pretty clear that there is at least the language that you're using is that there are systems of care that people are funneled into. They're mandated to do. They offer a type of philosophy or indoctrination, and to use your words, that is ultimately harmful to the individual who is mandated to either accept what they're offering or be kicked out and have to find either zero help available or try to figure it out on their own, and that can be dangerous. I think that's your position.
Yeah, indoctrination or coercion would be the ultimate harm to a person, because then they're, an otherwise reasonable person who otherwise could exercise a great deal of autonomy. Who knows where the ceiling would be to that? Maybe there is none. Is being told that there are limits to what they can do. And that really confines the ability to grow the way that you might want somebody to grow if they're going to leave an addiction behind.